Hello, and welcome to the podcast that tries to answer one simple question. What is this thing called film noir? I'm your host, Sergio Angelini, and welcome to Tipping My Fedora, where we discuss movies, books, TV, radio, and much more besides, all from the darker side of the street. My special guest today is Jonathan Rigby, who has been writing about films for over 30 years and has been an actor for even longer. He is the author of several books on horror cinema, including English Gothic, American Gothic, and Eurogothic, with American Gothic 2 on the way, and Studies in Terror, and has also written biographies of Christopher Lee and Roxy Music. He has also recorded loads and loads of audio commentaries and solo video interviews for Blu-ray releases. As an actor, he's best known for playing radio comic Kenneth Horne on numerous occasions, and as a director he revived the Sylvia Rayman play Women of Twilight for the first time in nearly 60 years, and that was over 10 years ago, with no further professional revival having happened since. Today we're going to talk about that play, his revival, and the 1952 film adaptation, which was originally released in the US as Twilight Women. Jonathan, welcome to the podcast. It's brilliant to have you here at last.
Oh, well, I'm very pleased to be here.
So before we start talking about you and your oeuvre, this is a noir podcast, so I'm going to ask you noir-type questions. So the first one is, what is your definition of film noir, if you have one?
I tend to think of film noir as being jaded and cynical and desperate characters, frequently all three, sort of set against chiaroscuro backgrounds, very often slatted kind of lighting effects. They're the things that to me says film noir. There's when there's a window and it casts slatted shadows across the backdrop. It's all very, very moody. I know there are much more in-depth definitions of that, but that's what when you say film noir, that's just the image that comes to mind.
Yeah. No, and you get instant brownie points because you're about the only person who's ever been on my podcast who didn't mispronounce chiaroscuro. So there you go. So, I knew you
Really?
wouldn't.
Oh.
Yes, it's a bit depressing, isn't it? Chiaroscuro is my personal favorite, but I find that even harder to say. So I don't know why people would choose that one. So yeah. If that's the sort of the definition we're going with, so it's kind of like the mood and some of the visual elements. What do you think the first film that is sort of a film noir that you remember seeing?
Well, you see, in this instance, you've got to bear in mind that I'm a horror man. And
in the best possible way.
That's right. At the age of 11, shockingly early age, I was soaking up horror films at a fantastic rate. And I thought to myself, I think the first noir or noirish film I saw, as a result, must have been Jacques Tourneur's Night of the Demon. And I did a tiny bit of research before coming on here, and I noticed that it was shown by ITV London in July 1974, and I'm thinking to myself, that was it.
That was when you first saw it? Oh, fantastic.
Yes.
Ooh. Yes. Yeah, see, I've been I try to figure out what my formative experience was, and I have trouble coming up with one, partly because I suspect that I was probably a little bit older. And I think I had preconceived notions before I got there about, I was looking for stuff, which is kind of a shame. You kind of, is it, is that, does it count? And you're kind of believing what other people tell you counts, and rather than figuring out in your mind, that must be it. And I think I probably saw Detour when I was about 14.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, yes. Well, that's a good one to start with.
And it was on Italian telly in the 80s. And they used to do, a bit like in Britain, you'd get an intro from a sort of academic type person. If you're in Italy and you say Enrico Ghezzi, then you're sort of thinking maybe Barry Norman type, but actually a very kind of intellectual Barry Norman. I don't know, Alexander Walker meets, I don't know, somebody intellectual. And they would always do an intro. They put it in context for you. It's not exactly self-discovery, is it?
No, well, at the age of 11, I had no context. I wasn't sitting there, aged 11, thinking, "Oh, this is a film noir." I was thinking, "This is a grand old British horror film with a great galumphing demon in it," which was my kind of thing. But it has all the hallmarks of it.
It's a fantastic film, and I think, yeah, and Turner made so many fantastic noir
He
films as
did,
well, of course.
yes.
So, what got you into horror, and how did that sort of start to form your own interests in terms of your later work as an actor and a director and a writer and a historian?
That's a very good question. I'm not quite sure. I rewatched John Pertwee's first Doctor Who serial recently,
Ah,
Spearhead from Space,
yeah.
and which I know made a huge impact on me at the time. And I thought, wow, this is a really good horror story. Quite a lot of Quatermass mixed into it, but we don't
Mm.
mind that. And I thought this is really effective, and this was the thing that got me into Doctor Who in the first instance. And then I heard tales from my brother, and particularly from my father, actually, about all the horror films I was going to see, and I became very envious. And so in 1974 or thereabouts, maybe slightly earlier, my father used to let me stay up until after news at 10 to watch whatever the appointment fear type film was that was on that night. It was all very, very bad, really. But yes, and there was a film called Dracula Has Risen from the Grave, which particularly blew my socks off. And from that point on, I was lost, as it were. Yeah.
So, okay, so one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you was specifically about, well, it's always very nice to talk to you, but I wanted to talk about Women of Twilight because a little over 10 years ago, I went to a production of the original play that you staged. In fact, you staged more than one production of the play. And I thought, oh no, I want to talk a little bit about this. So I wanted to ask you, how did you first come across it as a play or as a film? What came first?
Well, I'm a big fan of Frida Jackson,
Of course.
who is the extremely unpleasant landlady in No Room at the Inn. And it was a film of hers that I couldn't find, and yet I seem to have a kind of memory of it. I don't know why, because again, Sheldon Hall, who's the expert on films on television, pointed out to me that the Independent Television Authority banned it from being shown by ITV in the 60s, but the BBC went ahead and showed it in 1964. But then it wasn't shown on television again until, would you believe this? And finally it was ITV until 1991.
Oh my
So
God.
yeah, so my memory of having vaguely seen it is probably a false memory. When I was at drama school in the late 80s, there was another drama school, ALRA, the Academy of Live and Recorded Arts, which no longer exists actually. And around about 88, I'm pretty sure it was Women of Twilight. There was a lot of talk among all the drama schools about this incredible all-women play with 11 wonderful roles in it for actresses. And, drama schools are always hungry for them. And we heard incredible things about this production of Women of Twilight. But I didn't go and see it. So eventually I'm thinking, no, this Frida Jackson film, I've got to see it. And I couldn't find it. And I thought, because this was before the days of instant availability. And so I thought, I'll read the play. I got the play out from the RADA library, oddly enough. And it completely knocked me for six, the play. There are a couple of emotional fulcrums in the play, one at the end of Act 1, Scene 1, and another at the end of Act 3, I think. And then a particularly gruesome sort of emotional fulcrum in Act 4. And these moments just floored me. And I thought, well, let's put it on. I was doing various rehearsed readings at the White Bear Theatre of forgotten 1950s plays. So I scheduled it second, and it got a big response. And by October of that year, which was 2013, I was putting on a fully fledged production. Now, you said I've done several productions of it. I haven't. It was all the same production. It was on at the White Bear in October 2013. It was repeated at the White Bear in January 2014, and then it went into a proscenium arch, Pleasance, Islington, in April 2014. So for a French production, it did very well. But the incredible thing is that, and I've researched this until I'm blue in the face, the incredible thing is that, as far as I'm aware, there had been no professional production of it. And of course, I accept the ALRA production because that was drama students. There had been no professional production of it since 1958.
Right.
1958 to 2013. So it was definitely a rediscovery, and it went down a storm, actually. People wondered where this play had been all their lives. The general theatrical history is that the kitchen sink arrived courtesy of John Osborne and others in 1956, and yet here was this play from 5 years earlier, where the kitchen sink admittedly is just off stage, but nevertheless, it's a very grimy and gritty social realist piece. And I think what really attracted me to it, though, beyond that, of course, and the opportunity to give these great parts to 11 actresses, the other thing that attracted me to it was that it is in a very strange and unusual genre, and I'm happy to say that Time Out in its review actually pointed this out. It's in a maybe it sits by itself, I don't know. It's in a little genre which I call Gothic social realism. Sounds almost like a contradiction in terms, but you see, it isn't. Sylvia Rayman, who wrote this marvelous play, proved that it exists, this subgenre. So that's the rather long-winded version. I was keen to see the film. I couldn't find it. I eventually saw the film, and of course, being a bit partisan to theatre in this particular instance, I have to say the film is not nearly as good as the play. It's a very interesting film. I think it's a good film, but the play is something else because, of course, the play had to be watered down for cinema audiences and for the British Board of Film Censors in particular. Of course, it's gone down in history as Britain's first ever X certificate film, by which I mean the first British film ever to get the newly inaugurated X certificate. But even to get the X, it had to be watered down quite a lot.
So if we go back to, let's start with the play then. So the play is in a single setting. It's this, what is it, like That's a right. sort of sub-basement. Is that right?
That's right, yes, in a sub-basement.
Yeah, and I remember all this very much from your production that I went to see, so which would have been, the first first iteration. No, the
iteration is good. Yes.
Yeah, of your production, which I thought in a way was interesting because we were sort of one floor up actually, but in actual fact, it had, oddly enough, you weren't at ground level, so it kind of the kind of sub idea because we were it sort of it was am I misremembering? Well, I might cut all this out, Jonathan. Am I misremembering? I thought we were on the one floor up.
I hate to tell you this, but you are misremembering.
Damn! I'm going to cut it out so I sound more intelligent.
Yeah. No, the White Bear was actually refurbished a few years later and became a first floor affair. But at the time that we were there, it was actually on the same level as everything else. It was on.
Okay, ground. I'm so glad you're here, Jonathan.
So yes, you could scissor that one out. Yeah.
I remember liking it a lot, but but okay. So the play, it's all set in that one location. I am remembering this correctly.
You're remembering that right? Yes.
Okay.
Very grim and rather squalid. Basement, sitting room cum bedroom.
And it's about what? It's about these women who rent rooms, or in fact not rooms, but just a space to sleep because they're all unwed mothers. Is that it? Or
that's basically it. And the woman who runs this boarding house and who looks after their babies, not very well, is a widow called Helen Alistair. And she used to be a nurse, which is a very important point in the play, cut out of the film. Presumably so as not to offend nurses, I don't know. And she has various boarders, and she particularly locks horns with a boarder called Vivienne, who is shunned by the other boarders because she was the lover of a convicted criminal who in fact gets hanged during the course of the play. She locks horns with Vivienne in major style, and Vivienne uncovers, there are spoilers here, by the way, the history of the house, which involves at least one baby, by implication, possibly more, buried in the back garden because it was imperfect. So Helen, the woman who runs the house, apart from her other imperfections, is also a bit of a eugenics enthusiast. Now, that sounds wild and maybe even a bit melodramatic, and the word melodrama has been thrown at the play and the film, but it was, in fact, exposing a social evil, which in the early 50s, it sounds very Dickensian, but in the early 50s, it was still there, and it shocked a lot of people.
I think Dickensian's right, and it's sort of astonishing. You sort of think this is after the Second World War. We've now got the NHS and so on and so forth. But actually, this idea that these women can't even find a room that will let them rent space because they're considered, social outcasts or...
That's right. Well, that's one. Of course, the film opens the play out to a degree, not to a huge degree actually, but it does, and that's one very good aspect of the film, where you do actually see Vivienne going round various houses. Admittedly, people are also aware that she's on the front cover of the newspaper because she's the lover of this guy I mentioned, this gangster type character. But it's a very good snapshot of the women generally going around house after house and being turned away, which is why Helen, the landlady, has this hold over them. She charges quite a lot of money for not very good accommodation.
No, in fact, she basically gets all their rations, doesn't she? And then sort of divvies them up, but not exactly fairly, we eventually discover. I mean, I think one of the strengths of the piece is that you start with something that is sort of shocking just because you sort of think it's unfair, it's unkind, and like you say, it belongs to a different century. But then it gets darker, and then it gets darker, and then it gets darker, and it builds, I think, brilliantly. And I am so impressed by that, because that seems, for a first-time playwright, I think very impressive, actually. I think that the way that certain things are layered in, so that you get a sense that there are things going on that are you're not necessarily being shown something, but actually there's something potentially very, very nasty indeed. It isn't just the gothic melodrama of, a mad person in the attic sort of idea, but it's a very interesting idea. So I don't know at what point, baby farming? Are there a lot of plays about baby farming? I don't think so.
There was a slightly similar play written much more recently called Be My Baby. But it is the kind, I said Dickensian, it's the kind of subject you would expect to find in some play from the 1880s.
Yeah.
And yet the power of it, of course, is it's set in 1951, which of course is now a long time ago to us as well. But it's still within living memory, of course. And as a result, when I revived it, it had a big impact on people. And at the end of each performance, I'd see men, actually, curious enough, men in particular, making hurried exits, hurrying for the exits to disguise their tears, So it is a powerful piece. And yes, people throw the word melodrama at it sometimes, but I don't understand the slightly purse-lipped revulsion for melodrama, because after all, where did melodrama go? It went into the cinema, and it went particularly now onto television. I watch so much stuff now, particularly police series, and I just think, well, this is just sheer out-and-out melodrama, and there's nothing wrong with that. People lap it up. But if you put it into a theatre nowadays, there's a bit of snobbery attached to it. And so in directing it, I was careful to make all the characters as believable as Sylvia Rayman makes them, because of course melodrama theoretically is peopled by mechanical characters who don't actually ring true in a real situation. But that's the wonderful thing about this play. It acknowledges that evil, if you want to call it that, evil exists, and it puts it into an entirely realistic situation. And as you say, it goes there, it gets darker and darker, and then you think, is it going to, oh my God, it's done that. It's done the, baby killing thing.
Yeah. And also, one of the, obviously it's, chucking people down the stairs, which, you sort of think, well, it's sort of terrifying when Richard Widmark does it in Kiss of Death, if we're talking about,
yes,
and it was okay, woman in a wheelchair, so it's okay, makes it even worse, and you just hear the bump, bump, bump. But this was a pregnant woman being chucked down a flight of stairs, and
well, actually, in the Sylvia Rayman's original stage directions, she doesn't talk about Vivienne being pushed down the stairs, because to push someone down the stairs on a nightly basis in the West End would be a trifle risky, shall we say. The stage directions just indicate that Mrs. Allister because, of course, Viviane has found and knows too much by this stage, Mrs. Alistair throws her against one of the horrible little beds that form part of this bedsit area. And she's pregnant, of course. Viviane is pregnant, and she is immediately thrown into terrible distress and is likely to die, having been thrown against the edge of this bed. Well, we didn't do that at the White Bear because there was a very useful pillar built into the wall. And we just had Mrs. Alistair literally fling Viviane against that pillar, and you should have heard the intakes of breath. It was horrifying to people, and in the Pleasance, of course, which was a cross arch, so we didn't have any pillar to throw her against. I had to do what Sylvia Rayman had originally suggested, which was just being thrown against the bed, and to my delight, it got the same reaction. Actually, it got the same intake, a horrified intake of breath. So there you go. Sylvia Rayman wasn't wrong. But of course, for a film, you do something more dramatic because you can. And yes, Frida Jackson throws Ren Ray down the stairs.
Where are you going?
I'm going to the police.
Oh, no, you're not. You're going right back to bed before you do yourself some harm.
Let me pass. You'll have to help me. Don't you understand? We'll have to get a doctor this time.
Shall I?
Yes, hurry, please. I can't.
It's quite early yet. Sally won't come down here again, and the other girls won't be in until after midnight. The last time I saw you, you were resting on your bed. I suppose you must have got up to get yourself a drink, turned faint again and fallen. I was upstairs in my room, so of course I didn't hear you.
You couldn't. You couldn't.
Couldn't I?
It's interesting because we sort of started talking about horror, and I'm someone who likes plenty of horror films, and yet that's not necessarily my go-to genre for everything. I know some people, most of my friends are, and I'm very noticeably the one who kind of slightly resists this. No, I'm going to go watch a Preston Sturges comedy, or I'm going to watch a Michael Curtiz drama from the 30s or something like that. But one of the things that I like so much about this film, and why it's so pleasing when you talk about it slightly in the kind of gothic stroke horror stroke noir idiom, is because to me that's what's really frightening. Of course, it's that idea of, no, this really exists. People really do this. It's a bit like, we were talking about Val Lewton scary. Well, we're talking about Jacques Tourneur doing Night of the Demon. And if we go back to the films he did for Val Lewton in the 40s, you've got Cat People, which is mostly suggestion, but which is a very specific kind of supernatural idea. But by the time you get to Seventh Victim, which is the fourth film in that cycle, which, okay, Tourneur didn't make, but it's about people who are devil worshippers, and what's frightening, it's what they believe. You don't see anything, because in actual fact there is no supernatural element within the film at all, but it's the things people do because they believe it. And in this case, one of the things that makes the play, I think, work so well is this, partly it's this dawning realization of just how terrible this landlady is, and just how clever she's been in a way at manipulating people and emotions who are vulnerable, and making it seem like she doesn't come across as a sweet old landlady either. She comes across, I think, as a plausible character. And that's surely much more frightening in a real world sense.
It's very much an ensemble piece, but even an ensemble piece, in order to function as a drama, has to have some focal characters. So yes, there are all these lovely parts, some smaller than others, but all the parts are lovely. But there are, even despite the fact that it's an ensemble piece, there are two lead characters. And of course, this was always reflected in the billing in the West End in the 50s. And that's Viviane, who's our heroine, if you like, and Mrs. Alistair. And everything else in the play sort of coalesces eventually around the contest between them. And as you pointed out, that contest reaches critical mass when Viviane is thrown down the stairs. And it's interesting to note, in terms of realism, yes, Mrs. Alistair is a monster on all sorts of levels. But in terms of realism, it's very noticeable that having maybe accidentally killed a baby shortly after the war and buried it in the back garden. Maybe accidentally. But it's very noticeable that in Act 5 of the play, after having almost killed Viviane, and sort of secretly hoping that she did kill Viviane for the reasons I mentioned, because Viviane knows too much, Mrs. Alistair does actually go to pieces, rather more than is shown in the film. She goes absolutely to pieces in the final section of the play, as if the horror of actually killing, as it turns out, she didn't in fact kill her, but of trying to kill another grown-up, has sort of scattered her psyche to the four winds. You know, I think it's very realistic. And after my production, I had a lot of interest from, at last, thank God, various drama schools showed an interest. The Drama Studio did it in July. It was a couple of months after my production closed, and then RADA did it in October. And for that, I went to see it sitting next to the 98-year-old Rona Laurie, who had directed the very first production in 1951.
Oh, fantastic.
That was almost a surreal kind of experience. And then a week later, we did a kind of symposium together with the director of the RADA version and me and Rona Laurie. And that was extraordinary.
So in comparing then the original play, the original text, with that film version, which came out really quite quickly, I mean, it has a number of claims to being particularly interesting just because it has some of the main actors from various different stage productions in the film, doesn't it? I think, which is was it 3 of them? Because at that point, it's, I mean, Frida Jackson and Renee Ray.
Well, the very first production was a little thing in Hayes, directed by Rona Laurie, and then Anthony Hawtrey, who ran the Embassy Theatre, took it up and put it on at the Embassy. And then it was transferred to the West End immediately. And Ren Ray as Viviane and Vida Hope as Jess, who is Mrs. Alistair's sort of henchwoman, young henchwoman. Vida Hope and Ren Ray both went into the film, which was done just after the West End production. This is a bit tedious. Just after the West End production closed. But for film purposes, they got in Frida Jackson to play Mrs. Alistair. And so when Jack Hilton, the theatrical entrepreneur, brought it back just a few months later, he thought, now is our chance to have Frida Jackson. It was originally Barbara Cowper, but now is our chance to have Frida Jackson on stage playing Mrs. Alistair. So he actually borrowed that from the film. The film hadn't yet been seen.
Yeah, so this is before the film came out. But
Frida Jackson was sort of limbering up to play her on stage,
whereas
Ren Ray and Vida Hope had already done it. So that was a very circuitous way of explaining that.
And Vida Hope's actually very good in the film.
I really she's a very interesting actress who died very young. She was also a director.
Also a director, wasn't she? Yeah.
She was, yes. And Ren Ray is does that, the sort of martyred quality of Viviane in that, and also the steel that she has to show when facing up to Mrs. Alistair is brilliant too, I think. And with Frida Jackson, I was watching her first scenes. She's so, and this is the way to play monsters, she's so sweetly reasonable initially. But even when she's being sweetly reasonable with the latest arrival at the house, who's played by Lois Maxwell, even then you can see this adamantine hardness behind her eyes. You know, the eyes do not match what she's saying. And but it is really still quite subtle. And as you say, the film, as does the play, takes us by surprise because it makes Mrs. Alistair far more appalling than we could ever have envisaged.
So the obvious change is, at least you get it out immediately, if you like. It's the opening out idea that you do with the play. So you start with something that's not in the play at all, but which is obviously implied and which you infer, which is that part of the story that relates to the lover who in the play we know he's been arrested and he's going to be hanged for murder, but we actually sort of see it's a very, very film noir scene.
It is very film, yes.
Yeah, you know, she's sort of sitting there, and then there's this great scene. I think they do it with a cut rather than changing the lighting, where she turns the light off, and there's this kind of opaque glass on their front door, so you see the silhouettes of the two policemen outside the front door, because it makes it look a bit sort of like a Japanese house, it's kind of like paper. But anyway, and so she goes out and sort of takes the fire escape and clatters away on her heels. So you're thinking they must have been able to hear that from the front door. But anyway, goes to the club, the 13 Club, so lucky for some. Yeah. And we get to hear some not very convincing singing from Lawrence Harvey, who is under contract.
No. Clearly under contract to the John and James Wolfe.
Yeah.
He was a big favourite of theirs. He wasn't quite yet a star, but I would imagine they provided a trailer just for his quiff, which is of stupendous proportions. And it has to be said, he's not very convincing in this film.
No,
he's a strange actor, Lawrence Harvey. Very strange. I can sort of take him or leave him a bit, I'm afraid. But he's not very good in this. But one reason he's not very good is because he's been shoehorned in, of course, because he doesn't appear in the play. Now, of course, by putting him in and a few other more sort of incidental men, you're obviously transgressing what the play was all about in a rather radical and damaging way, because it was an all-women play. But in order to be an all-women play, it had to be in an enclosed situation, i.e. the basement that you mentioned. Whereas if you're going to open a play out, you're going to go beyond that basement and go out into the world. And of course, if you go out into the world, you are inevitably going to get men appearing. So in a way, it was a kind of double-edged sword. You couldn't avoid it. But in order to give a little showcase, not much of a showcase really, but a little showcase to their favourite young leading man, Lawrence Harvey, they actually created this character who in the play is called Johnny Stanton, and in the film, for reasons I cannot begin to understand, was renamed Jerry Nolan. Don't know why that was. But anyway, he and his quiff play Jerry Nolan.
But you know what? Actually, do you think that the film is ever so slightly Americanized for export purposes? There's a couple of lines which I'm never sure. At one point, I think two of the characters, and I can't remember which now. One of them I think it's the Dora Bryan character, calls her honey, for instance, which seems very American to me.
I think, the play is rich in, rather than honey, the play is rich in the word ducks. How you
which are all gone, aren't they? Yeah.
Yeah, ducks. But, which is a very period touch, of course. But I think it's possible, I'd have to recheck, it's possible that character you mentioned, the Dora Bryan character, Olga, it's possible that she does say honey in the play, because, quite frankly, it's very obvious. Of course, Sylvia Rayman doesn't state it, but it's very obvious that she's a prostitute. And I get the impression that she's very up to the minute and very influenced by American culture, actually. So I'd have to double check, but I think it's quite possible that she does say honey.
Okay, then. There were a couple of other things.
But you're right, but anyway. That does help, doesn't it? That does help with sort of making it palatable to Americans, or so they thought.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit like when you watch some of those ITC dramas from the 60s and you know that they're changing some of it. It's like watching episodes of The Saint, and every now and then the odd vaguely transatlantic term creeps in, and because you think, it's like you don't refer to barristers, you refer to lawyers or things like that, or whatever. You don't say brief. Because they're not going to get it on the other side of the pond. So we get that sequence, and it works fine, as you say, but it does go counter to one of the absolute reasons why the play is important and different. So it's no longer, it's primarily about these women and it's their story.
It is their story. I mean, I was actually watching it again today. I was reminded that Anatole de Grunwald, who adapted it for the screen, he was quite a specialist in adapting plays into film. He did a lot of work with Terence Rattigan and Anthony Asquith, in fact, didn't he?
Yeah.
On exactly that kind of task. It's very obvious that despite the fact that he had to do these damaging things to open it out, it's very obvious that he did actually respect the play, because there is a lot of Sylvia Rayman's dialogue in there. Obviously, it's trimmed down, sort of finessed a bit for film purposes, but there's a lot in there. And you see, Lawrence Harvey has a sort of decentish part, and all the other men just literally pass through. They're kind of nothing parts, really. So effectively, apart from that prologue you mentioned, and apart from a scene in his prison cell later, effectively it is the play. And so effectively it really does focus on the women
Yeah.
But the mere fact that these men had to be put into it it's a little irksome. But of course, I can understand the commercial necessity for it. Because of course you have to open the play out, and if you open the play out, you go out into the world, and there are men. There's some great lines about men in the play. Actually, I think it's Olga, the prostitute, who says, "Men are the biggest mistake on God's earth," and Jess, the henchman, says, "Oh no, I love men." Yeah. So, there's all sorts of stuff like that. And lots of lovely language, actually, that's really redolent of the period. I notice that the film has. Mrs. Allister says to Vivienne when she's telling her you're not in good enough health to go out and become a waitress. She says you'd soon crock up.
Yes.
I first read that in the play. I thought, is that a misprint for crack up? No, you'd soon crock up. And Jess says to her, probably the youngest person in the house, Veronica, she says, "Don't be such a soppy date." Soppy date. Such lovely early 50s. Well, immediately post-war vernacular.
I got that from my grandma. So I got that said to me, I'm afraid, about being a soppy date. So there you go.
Oh, well, so it's not just Veronica, it's you too.
What do you think are the major changes, if you like, that distinguish or keep that make the film very different from the play? Do you think? Well, what are the most important ones?
We've touched on the major change, of course. Jerry Nolan. And that's really the major change. I'll tell you one very interesting change. Talking of Jerry Nolan, I'll give you a little bit of dialogue here.
Ooh, please do.
This is Jess explaining why Vivienne is so reviled because of the gangster she's been consorting with, and indeed has had a baby with. Jess explains Johnny Stanton's backstory like this. She says, "Don't you read the papers? Lousy little coward walks into a cinema with a scarf round his mouth and a gun in his hand and shoots down 3 innocent people, all for the sake of a few measly quid, which he'd hope to spend on her, no doubt." Now, does that remind you of anything? Does that remind you of a film that Sylvia Rayman could well have watched in 1950, just the year before the play was first produced? The Blue Lamp. Dirk Bogarde with the scarf round his face, holding up a cinema box office. Now, probably because it was too similar to the Blue Lamp, Anatole de Grunwald concocted this slightly odd business about Jerry having been consorting with a countess. And when the countess realizes that he's filched some of her jewels, he sort of accidentally on purpose kills her. That was de Grunwald's big change, because I think that Sylvia Rayman's scenario was just too similar to the Blue Lamp.
All right, I'll hold on.
You know this is, don't you? This is Jerry Nolan's piece.
I've never heard of him.
Don't you read the papers? Cheap little Romeo meets a society dame. Then when she catches him pinching her jewels, he goes and kills her.
Shut up.
Hanging's too good for him.
I told you to shut up.
It's a free country, isn't it? I've a right to speak my mind.
Oh, the law will see to it that the man is punished.
Yes, but will the law stop her from bringing his brat into the world? Let go of me, little cat, and scratch me. Oh, she scratched me, could give me blood poisoning.
It serves you right. You asked for it, didn't you?
As far as I'm concerned, she'd obviously seen it. She'd seen a lot of films, you know. She'd seen that Gene Kent film from 1948, Good Time Girl. A lot of those rather raffish and slightly sleazy post-war British films, I think they fed into the play. So you see, the play was, I think, informed by quite a few film influences. So the fact that it then became a film is, just makes it all the more fascinating.
This is the sort of thing which in a movie would be something crushing, but I don't know anything else about her subsequent career after writing that play. Do we know a lot about what happened after the success of this?
No, we don't. I mean, she was a 28-year-old waitress in a milk bar on the Finchley Road in North London when this play was taken up by an entrepreneur called Jean Shepherd, actually, who was the person who first put it on, and she helped her sort of finesse it into being a workable play. And she also, by the way, Jean Shepherd came up with the title, I believe. But within a year of the play first going on for 1 week in Hayes, within a year of that, it had gone to the Embassy, it had gone to the West End, it had been made into a film. It was then coming back into the West End at the Victoria Palace twice nightly. God, can you imagine, twice nightly? So within a year of that, Sylvia Rayman's world was turned upside down. It remained a staple right through the 50s, at any rate up to 1958. And then, as I indicated before, after 1958, it fell off a cliff. It's like it was a play for that, very specifically for that post-war period. And that after that, it went into that very awkward phase when it became merely dated. Now, you see, by the time I picked it up again, I think it had become vintage rather than dated, which is always a much better thing to be, because it gives you that insight. It doesn't appear dated anymore. It gives you a very detailed insight into the time. But her subsequent career involved writing a few extra plays in the late 50s, most of which just had little regional tryouts and got no further. If I remember right, some of them were comedies, actually. And I don't really know what happened to her after that, but she died in 1986, and I think she was only 62 or 3 at the time. And so, yeah, she'd had this gigantic, it was one of those gigantic, unrepeatable successes. I think you'd have to be a very, very, very unusual and unusually lucky playwright to have a success that big again. I mean, take somebody like Anthony Schaffer. I mean, he wrote a whole load of plays after Sleuth, but Sleuth was essentially unrepeatable because it was so gigantic, so massive. Now, Sleuth is constantly revived, so there's a difference there. But in a way, I think a huge burden was placed on her because this play did so well. I mean, it shocked people and it was considered a little disreputable, I think, by some of the posher critics. But nevertheless, it coined it in. And as I say, it was on somewhere throughout, from 1951 to 1958, it was on somewhere every single night of the week. And then just disappeared.
That's fascinating, isn't it? I mean, is it in the very first production that Angelico has a small role, who later go on to write The Knack?
And yes, you know, I'd forgotten that. Angelico played a character called Laura in the original production, the very original production, the one that was just on for a week. And actually, there's something very interesting happens vis-a-vis Laura, because Laura is a woman who's described as being close to 40, a bit older than all the other girls, obviously not as old as Mrs. Alistair, but she's a bit older than all the other girls, and that she was just very keen to have a baby. And the father of the baby was very keen to marry her, but she said, no, I don't want to get married. I just want my baby. And so she turns up at Mrs. Alistair's place, and they all think she's a bit weird, you know, getting in the cart on purpose, as I think the phrase is. And so she's a strange, transgressive character, Laura. It's a very small part, really, but it's a very, very effective part. And in the film, they junk this rather transgressive character completely. And they replace her, slightly oddly, with a German character called Lily. And so de Grunwald gets to poke some little satirical fun at the British through Lily, because of course Germany is on the up with its economic miracle, and of course Britain is still in a terribly depressed state, and so there are a few comments about that. But it was a very strange substitution, but I would imagine it's because Laura was just too much for the British Board of Film Censors, so she became this German character called Lily. It's one of the strangest wrinkles.
That is odd. Yeah.
No. But
I mean, it was more the casting of Angelico, you know.
Yeah, the future playwright Angelico did indeed. She was an actress initially, of course, and she wrote The Knack later on, most famously, and The Sport of My Mad Mother, things like that. But she did indeed play Laura right at the beginning.
So, do you think the film holds up as well as the play?
Well, I indicated at the beginning that my feeling has always been that it's not as good as the play. I mean, the play can take the gloves off in a way that the film can't quite to the same degree. I did find the emotional moments that, when I first read the play, those emotional moments that floored me, I did find that they were very effective still in the film. I had a little cry, I don't mind admitting it. But I felt this, because it had to shoehorn in the gangster guy with the quiff and all that stuff, I think the essential sort of fluidity and cohesion of the play sort of, what a horrible image, like a body sort of separating, having been thrown into a river or something. But it doesn't quite cohere in the way that the play does. And I felt today, watching it again, that it was a little bit slow. Now, I hate to say that, because the knee-jerk response of most modern viewers to anything made before, I don't know, 2000 is that they're too slow. But I did feel it was a little laboured here and there. And also, you mentioned that there's a terrible dubbing job done to indicate that Lawrence Harvey can sing, which he clearly couldn't. But there's also a terrible dubbing job on Mary Germain, who plays the very posh young inmate Veronica. There's a dreadful, I don't know if it's her dubbing herself I'd have to check some of her other films. But whatever it is, it sounds terrible. And also, she's almost comically Mr. Chumley Warner, post-war, kind of British RP that you expect to see in Brief Encounter and all the rest of it.
She gives me the creeps. I'm sure she ought to be put away. If Mummy'd seen her, she'd never have let me stay here.
That would be a great loss to us all. I'd best hurry. I'm going to be late for my friends.
I bet my friends are playing tennis at the club tonight. We used to have some lovely times.
I'll bet you did.
I wish I could go home.
What now, all the neighbours peeping at you from behind their curtains, trying to figure out where the little stranger came from?
Oh, they'd know it wasn't my fault.
That sort of drags the film down a little bit. But I think given the circumstances, I think it's a very good adaptation of the play. I noticed that when it finally came back onto British TV in 1991, I noticed there was a preview of it saying, Frida Jackson victimizes unmarried mothers in squalid potboiler. And I thought, hey, they're trying to put people off there. That wouldn't have put me off. Squalid potboiler. That's what you want, isn't it? It's not really a potboiler, actually, but it certainly it is. But okay, if you're going to use loaded, snobbish words like that, then yes, it is squalid. But in point of fact, one thing about the film that I will mention is I feel that Nellie's house, which in the play is intimated to be in Hampstead, Nellie's house in the film is far too nice to look at outside, and it's also far too nice inside. I don't know if you remember my production, but it was an absolute shithole.
Well, I didn't like to say.
It was a very good set, but there was mold, there was damp. And then when we were transferred to the Pleasance, we actually altered that because we had to use flats rather than have the actual space of the theatre itself. We had flats, so we had lots and lots of horrible peeling wallpaper instead of damp. I think, one of the original set in the West End was described as being painfully squalid in every detail, and I think the film backs off a bit from that.
Yes, it's not squalid enough, really.
It's not quite squalid enough.
No.
But the film does add one other thing. There's this enormously. This is one of the things that really got me into the play that I mentioned. Sal, who's the character who's used as a slave by Mrs. Alistair. She has what I think in later eras would be called learning difficulties. Sal reveals that it was her baby that was buried in the back garden, and Vivian suddenly perks up thinking, oh my God, and then Mrs. Alistair appears. And then Mrs. Alistair in the film throws Vivian down the stairs. The film does add a very good Frida Jackson is the scariest actress in Britain extra detail. It then shows you Sal looking from an upstairs window down at the garden, the burial plot. And then Mrs. Alistair appears in the doorway and just says, Sally, I want a word with you. And that's scary. That's not in the play.
No, that's very well shot. And in fact, because
it's Jack Asher, isn't it?
Yeah, it's Jack Asher. And because, of course, you get a very nice, presumably second unit shot of the garden. That's, quite artfully done with shadows and so on, but, real night for night. And then you have the shot and the door opens, so the light comes in on the wall next to her, and she turns, and then you get the line. And so thinking, no, it's wonderfully balanced and timed brilliantly. But as you say, there are these kind of Hammer-esque elements that I think just give it that extra frisson.
Well, of course, Mrs. Alistair is seen at the top of the stairs in that horrible scene where she throws Vivian down the stairs. She's seen at the top of those stairs, and in my Hammer fan way, I can't neglect to say that 5 years later, Jack Asher filmed a very similar scene with Christopher Lee's Dracula appearing at the top of something.
I know it's disappointing to learn it wasn't shot at Bray.
Oh dear, indeed. Yeah, but yes, it's a good film. It's a good film, and it's very fascinating to actually compare it with the play. But the play is better. I'm sure Sylvia Rayman wasn't too worried. I mean, she was having the success of her life. But...
Yeah. The ending of the film, I'd sort of managed to forget that. The whole kind of, we'll swap babies sort of thing.
Yes, well, it's a very, we had a lot of crying in that scene. Actually, yeah. It's a very bittersweet ending because in order to carry on with her life and to get past this trauma that she suffered, Vivian has to give away her baby. Well, I say she has to, she doesn't have to, but she gives it away to her best friend, Christine. They initially had a very spiky relationship because, of course, Viviane initially is rather unapproachable and difficult and spiky.
Yeah.
But then in the course of the play and the film, you see them growing closer and they become bosom friends. And the fact that then Christine, who has lost her baby, see, this is another thing. A baby actually dies in the course of the action, never mind being one from 1946 or whatever it is being buried in the garden. Christine's baby dies in the course of the action. And at the end, Viviane has given birth to her baby, and she agrees to give it to Christine, who I think is going to go over to Canada.
Australia.
Oh, in the film,
in the film, it's Australia. Yeah.
Well, it's Australia. In the play, it's Canada. Ooh,
which is where Lois Maxwell was from, right?
Which is where Lois Maxwell plays the queen from. Yes, bizarrely. Anyway, so there's this very bittersweet thing. There's this happy resolution for Viviane, but in order to attain that happiness, she has to give away her baby, and so you have that wonderful final close-up on Ren Ray, looking a strange combination of desolated and happy. It's quite a tough ask for an actor, but it's very, very brilliant. And on stage, I was very lucky with my production because I had 11 marvelous actresses, and Lizzie Donnelly and Claire Louise Amos, who played those two parts at the end there, gave it so much emotion that yes, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. I'll pat myself on my back to that degree, but really this is all down to the actors.
Again, having proved that my memory is far from infallible, I remembered yours slightly better than the way it's sort of staged in the film, because oddly enough in the film, because it slightly soft pedals the death of Chris's baby, it's a bit less clear about how much time has passed and those elements to it.
Yes, that's true. Yes, and it's not quite clear. Where's Christine gone after the death of her baby? None of that's quite clear. It is actually much clearer in the play. But the death of Christine's baby, I did think was effective because I'd forgotten the degree to which Mrs. Alistair is appalling in that scene, because it's entirely her fault that this baby sickened and eventually died. But of course, she offloads the blame onto Viviane in the most horrifically manipulative way. You could do a production of this play where you try to explain Mrs. Alistair. But the point is, of course you can explain Mrs. Alistair, but she's still appalling. Her machinations. There's one very interesting line in the play, actually. Apart from referring to herself as having been a nurse twice in the play, and Anatole Grunwald cut both of those references, which we mentioned, she also says right at the beginning, when she's welcoming Christina to the house, she said, "I had a child once." Now look, 5 words. But you can build from that 5 words vis-a-vis motivation for this monstrous character. You can build all sorts of stuff from that. But Anatole Grunwald cut those 5 words.
Yeah, you don't know either if it's sort of making her, by that stage of the narrative, more obviously monstrous and villainous and not wanting to add any layer of complexity by this point. And, it doesn't matter whether that redeems her in any way, explains her in any way, whether you even believe her. Maybe she's utterly delusional,
Well, indeed, do you believe her? Well, you see, these are the little hints that actors use, of course, to build a character, and they create their own. Those strange 5 words. Sylvia Rayman doesn't elaborate on them, and nor does Mrs. Alistair herself, of course. Those 5 words, you can build from that whatever you like, but it doesn't detract from the fact that she hardened her heart at some point and became what she is, which is Mrs. Alistair. And Frida Jackson is the perfect person to play that part, because she's very, very scary.
Is she sort of replaying this role from this earlier film? I mean, what do you think about that? I mean, did that make her obvious casting in somebody's mind because they remembered that? What do you think?
Well, you're referring to No Room at the Inn, which was a play by Joan Temple, which I think first came out 1944 or 45, and it was a huge personal hit for Frida Jackson, playing Mrs. Voray, and she's another landlady, but she's a very slatternly landlady. She's not the rather faux posh character that she plays Mrs. Alistair as. She's always got a fag, sort of hanging from a lip. But she terrorizes evacuees, i.e. children, because she puts up evacuees. It's set at towards the end of the war. And this was a huge theatrical hit for her. She did the film version, which is very good. And so I think when it came time to do the film version of Women of Twilight, the fact that the characters were quite similar in certain respects made Daniel Angel and the Wolf brothers think this is the woman to play this part on film, because it's like a posh version of Mrs. Voray. I was actually reading a Frida Jackson interview earlier today. There aren't many, where she says, Mrs. Voray, of course, was a huge hit for me, but in a way it was a millstone around my neck. It's the classic typecasting thing. After that, she was constantly being asked to play effectively the same character. In the case of Women of Twilight, she agreed, but I get the impression that she rejected an awful lot. And I think that may be because she was aware that it was a powerful piece, a very powerful piece and worth playing, despite the sort of superficial similarity to Mrs. Voray and Noram at the end.
I was going to ask you, with tongue slightly in cheek, about the fact that unusually there's a really, really reliable Wikipedia page for this film. And there's a reason for that, Jonathan. Why don't you share with our listeners why that is? What did you do to that page?
Oh, you're very, very bad. Well, when I first decided to put the play on, and we're going back 12 years here, of course, I looked at Wikipedia, and to my amazement, there was only a very skeletal page regarding the film. And the only writer credited was Anatole de Grunwald, a man,
Right.
amongst other things. It didn't even say that it was based on a play by Sylvia Rayman. And I was horrified. And so if that Wikipedia page is unusually detailed and unusually, I hope, authoritative, it's because basically I wrote it. Having said that, I've not looked at it for some time. It may be, and this is the danger with Wikipedia, that there's some loon who thinks something is a mistake when in fact it isn't. It may have gone in and fiddled with it. Who knows? Although I don't think so.
No, I don't think so either. I went in and looked in the back, and it hasn't been mucked around with very much. You know, you can see the history of changes. So, yeah.
The Wikipedia page 12 years ago was a shocker, you know.
Yeah.
Wikipedia in particular, but I think just the general sort of sense memory of human beings tends to exclude theatre an awful lot. I don't think people know how to chronicle it or even to be aware that it exists or existed. So on one level, the fact that it didn't even mention it was based on a play didn't surprise me, but it did appall me. So that's the reason, the pompous reason, why the page is quite fulsome.
Well, we're all very grateful, because let's face it, if you're on a Google search, let's just say it's the first thing that comes up, you know, and whether you do for Women of Twilight or Twilight Women, as it was known in America, the film, not the play. So, you know, it's good that at least you're getting some decent info for a change, I think. And you've got some very good reviews in there as well and things like that, I think. Some good primary information.
Good,
so,
good.
Yeah, well done.
I mean, it's a very interesting play, and it's a very interesting film. I urge people to watch the film, being aware that it's not quite as good as the play, but it's still very good.
Now, before we wind things up, can I just ask you to tell us, Jonathan, what can we look forward to seeing or hearing of yours soon? You're very busy. You have what can only refer to as an insane number of audio commentaries done over the years. I have rather a lot of them in my house. You were just looking at some of my shelves, and all the Blu-ray ones are downstairs. What can people look forward to hearing you talk about that you're prepared to let us know?
Oh, well, there are people who've done much more insaner numbers of audio commentaries. Eureka are about to bring out a lovely box set of German crimi films.
Ah, yes. I've got an order in. Yes.
Yes, from the early and mid 60s. And Kevin Lyons and I tend to do audio commentaries with Kevin Lyons. We are chattering away about 3 of those. And they were very, very, very fascinating to do, actually. I really rather like those really strange, quirky and eccentric and frankly nuts sometimes German versions of Edgar Wallace and Brian Edgar Wallace, his son. They're very interesting and engaging films. So I think that's coming out fairly imminently. That one.
Fairly soon, yes. I think the Mabuse set comes out before it, and I think that one comes out about a month after.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So
yeah,
there's a lot of CCC creamies heading our way. So I'm getting that box set. Can't wait. Tell me more. What else can we
tell
look
you
forward
more? Oh, well, I'm working on a book that I have to say I've been working on for quite a long time now, but for reasons I shan't bore you with, it's been taking a very long time. I'm working on a new book called American Gothic 2, which, as you can probably tell, is a sequel to a book I wrote called American Gothic.
I have it right over there.
That's nearing completion, I'm happy to say. Also, I've recently directed another show with Claire Louise Amos performing some of Edith Nesbit's ghost stories, which went down very well on its London run, which was a few weeks back, and we've got a tour. We're quite a few dates we've got together already, actually. So I think getting on, more than 10. Yes, a tour is being organised for October, and also with
terrific.
with some dates next year. So yes, I directed that, and there's always stuff. There's always stuff going on.
Well, I'm very glad to hear that. So, Jonathan, thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast so that we could talk about this terrific play and this very, very good movie as well in its own way. And, you know, I couldn't think of anybody else who I wanted to hear talk about it. So
thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you for making an appearance. Talk to you soon. You have been listening to Tipping My Fedora, the show about all things noir. It is produced for Castiglione Publishing by me, Sergio Angelini, and our theme tune is by Petar Milinkovic, whose work is available through Tailkeeper Music. All audio clips are the copyright of their respective owners, and used under fair dealing and fair use exceptions solely for the purposes of criticism and review. Please subscribe to Tipping My Fedora wherever you get your podcast fix. And it would be great if you could leave ratings and reviews about the show at Apple Podcasts. Be seeing you.